Well, welcome everybody to the Development Assessment Committee for July 20. I'll open the meeting. All councillors are present. To note, this meeting is recorded in accordance with Council's governance rules. So, for information, item 4, confirmation of minutes of the Wednesday meeting, the 15th of June 2022. Someone move that. Councillor Edwards, Councillor Berry. All those in favour? It's carried. Thank you. Any matters arising from the previous minutes, councillors? Nil. Item 6, disclosure of conflicts of interest. Are there any with councillors? Okay, thank you. Item 7, 7.1. This is a development use of a dwelling and ancillary shed at 337 Swans Road, Darley. We have a speaker to this item, Mr. Steve Harper. So, Mr. Harper, would you like to come forward, please, and give your presentation to councillors, please? If it's green, it's on.
Well, there we go. Is that on? Okay. Thanks for the opportunity to present this evening. I appreciate that. I also wanted to acknowledge the planning department that I've been working with, who've both been extremely professional and responsive as I've worked through this issue. And thanks also to the council members over the last day or so that have provided some valuable advice and guidance, and that's certainly appreciated. So I want to jump in, talk about what my concerns are here. The underlying principle in granting this permit, guided by the Planning and Environmental Act, is that the landowner is to improve the current environmental values and then maintain the land to a higher environmental standard. So that's what I understand, and that's why there's a recommendation put forward to grant this approval. The proposed planning conditions, however, in my mind, do not enforce this and are subjective and lack enforceability. That's really the heart of what I'm talking about tonight, is that there are conditions that are being proposed to be put on the planning permit that I feel do not, there's no clear mechanism for compliance and there's no clear measurable objectives. That's the main heart of this, and I'll go into a little bit more detail here. The introduction of clear and measurable actions to improve the land is welcome, so I want to be clear that I'm very happy with that, but I think this is the wrong way to do it, and there's not, the depth is not there. I point to the agenda. I'm happy to read this, but on page 18 of tonight's agenda it says, it is recommended that sufficient land management works must be completed prior to the issuing of a building permit for a dwelling, and this should be made a condition of the permit. That's reasonable to me. I go back and look at the conditions. It's not a condition, so it hasn't been included as a condition. What is on there is an abbreviated but not full condition that covers that, so that's certainly a primary concern for me. One of the conditions that comes close talks about the watercourse and gullies, but it doesn't talk about all of the other environmental concerns or environmental matters or environmental management actions, that's the word I was looking for, put forth in the land management plan. So that's the primary concern there. Both the land management plan and the subsequent landscape concept plan lacked suitable detail. So I'll give you a quick example here. They talk in generalities about plantings and doing things, but there's no specifics. There's nothing that says you will accomplish a specific task, such as planting X amount of trees or performing this by a specific date. Now, some of those details are in there, granted, but it does not reflect the intent of the land management plan. And my concern is that this is just simply going to lead to ambiguity, both from me as I didn't say this, sorry, but at the start of this, I am a neighbouring property to the north of this property. So the lack of environmental work on that property will flow over to me. And I'm just concerned that the granting of this permit, without those very clear actions in place, will prohibit that being complied with. There's no clear definition of how sufficient land management works. And this is a rhetorical question, but can anybody define sufficient? I can have my definition of it, which might be 90%. There might be a different definition that says sufficient is 50%. That ambiguity, again, doesn't work. The land management plan is laid out over 10 years. Does that mean that sufficient is in year 9? I don't think that's the intent. So again, that ambiguity is not there. The final part of this, and then I'll go into my request, but is it's not adequate, it's subjective and lacks enforceability, and I've not been shown where there's a clear mechanism for compliance. So who says that the landowner who's putting this permit in is actually complying with the land management plan, which, as I've said earlier, is vague, unclear? What are they exactly complying with? So that's the heart of the issue. What I'm requesting is that there's a revised land management plan and landscape concept plans that simply have clear and specific measurable tasks that adhere to the intent of the land management plan. It's really that simple. I appreciate that's a bit of work for someone to do, for the applicant to do, but that's what is required to ensure we have clarity there. I've said this before, but the vagueness of this, I think, sets it up for failure. So I'm asking if the granting of this planning permit is deferred until such time as those can be completed, the revised land management plan and land concept plan. The other request that I'm making, although it is in here, but I'm a little unclear, but is that a clear path of once that is completed, a clear path of the land management plan, that this is also included on the section 173. So what that does is that then puts it as part of the title, which means that it can carry forward if in fact the current owner sells or moves the property on, that the land management plan and the conditions don't get lost in that transaction. You understand those documents don't sit together, but if it does go onto the section 173, I do see reference to that within tonight's agenda, so perhaps that has been addressed. So look, I've boiled that down as quickly as I can, given the short period of time, but that's the gist of my objection, is that so I'm not looking to stop the dwelling or the shed, but it is being done under the conditions of, under the auspice of a land management plan, which is to improve the environment. This is a farming zone area, and this is the way you can build a dwelling in that area. But if the land management plan, which it is, in my opinion, lacks that detail, simply can't comply with it. Who can comply with it? The owners, nor council, and nor can I monitor it. And the only other notes that I've made on there, on my notes, excuse me, there's a few things that have come through with these papers. There's still some documentation that's incorrect that I have pointed out to council on 2 occasions. The plans are incorrect. I've pointed that out twice. They still remain incorrect. New documentation was presented with these papers. I don't think that that's correct. In fact, that documentation should have been put up on Greenlight some time ago, so I don't know why that's been provided. And then that's probably those are the highlights there. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr Harper. Any questions of Mr Harper, councillors? Okay. Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr Harper. Council will now deliberate on this matter. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Councillors, there is a recommendation, and there was an alternate recommendation. So,
question
yes, Councillor Edwards, please.
Just of officers in relation to the land management plan. Condition 2 requires a land management plan of satisfaction of responsible authority, obviously council, to be endorsed. What is the process to get a land management plan endorsed, and at what stage would it be endorsed?
Mr Phillips, please.
So through the chair, so condition 1C requires that the current land management plan, action plan and timeline to nominate the construction of the dwelling is to be updated. And then condition 2 means that any plan that is provided is endorsed by council to the satisfaction of council. So we have a current land management plan. We've recognised that it needs a little bit of work, so we've put a condition 1C on there to require those some updates in relation to that. It's generally done to the satisfaction of council, so it's submitted to council. We look at the plan. If we're not satisfied, we go back to the applicant and express what our issues are, and once we're satisfied, that gets endorsed under condition 2, and then just in relation to the section 173, it's also referred to in the 173 that plan has been endorsed under condition 2. So anyone who purchase the property in the future, we'll see that in the 173 and refers back to the endorsed land management plan.
Ms Village?
Subsequent,
Sorry,
if I
Councillor.
can, just to follow on that
Yes.
same point. So it's not unusual for council to require updates of plans, is it, or have a clause such as that in A?
No, that's correct. It's look, sometimes you get a plan which is spot on. Other times you'll identify that there are some shortcomings in it, and then we would go through the process, what we've done here, and just request an update.
Thank you, Mr Village. Councillor Dudzik, you have a question or a comment, please?
I wanted to move an alternative recommendation as circulated.
This is the one that has been circulated. All councillors have a copy of that, I understand. So everyone is aware of the... So is there a seconder for that, please? Councillor Berry. Is there any dissent? I'll put that. All those in favour? It's carried, thank you. Just to those in the gallery, this is an alternate recommendation with... It's just some other additional items, and I think Mr Phillish will hand out one now, so you have a copy of what the what has been decided. Okay, thank you. Next item of business, item 7.2, which relates to the use of land for free-range poultry at 369 Old Melbourne Road, Bungaree. There's a detailed recommendation there. Councillors, any questions? Move Councillor Tatchell. Is there a seconder? Councillor Minari. Any dissent? I'll put that. All those in favour? It's carried. Thank you. Next item of business is development and use of a warehouse and reduction in car parking spaces at 8 Bond Street, Mattingley. Again, there is a recommendation there. In your hands, councillor, wish to move that or have a question?
We have a speaker to that, Mr Mayor.
Oh, sorry, we do too. I beg your pardon? We do. So, Mr Ben King and Mr Tim McNamara, please. Oh, okay. On my sheet it says 7.3, so I apologise for that. So I was going with I was following the flow sheet, so yes.
Well, I reckon we should run with Mr Mayor.
I'm in your hands, councillors. So 7.3.
Yeah, it's not right. It's not right on there, please.
So-
The speaker numbers are wrong.
Well, that's what I was going with, so I apologise for the confusion. That's 7.4. So we don't have a speaker with 7.3. Okay. Okay, sorry about that.
I've got a late scratching.
I've got late scratching. They didn't inform the bookie. So,
I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Dudzik. Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I suppose I had two questions, but after rereading the documentation, I was happy with the car park. I suppose I was a little bit concerned. Well, I suppose I was just checking, asking Henry if we could possibly have some clarity. On page 33, top of the page, it says, before the development commences, Lot 1, and I won't read the digits out, and Lot 1 on the adjoining property must be held in common ownership, or a lease is to be obtained to the satisfaction of the responsible authority. I understand one of those properties, a sliver of that land, is owned by Mirrabul Shire Council, so I'm just asking Henry's view on how that can best be achieved, and the difficulty of that process, please, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr Basudenhout and Mr Phillips, you're able to respond to that question, please?
Through the chair. You're right, there's a very thin slither of land which is owned by Mirrabul Shire. So we constructed this condition on purpose, which essentially we want that to a process to be going through where they can utilise that. Ownership is something that probably could happen, but it might take a while, so we've put it down as a lease. And the main reason for that is you'll note that that slither actually creates an access issue for those parking spaces. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Tatchell, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. I suppose my question is that I think in the beginning there was an issue in terms of power called pole. Has that issue been resolved? Because I believe that's on that slither of Mirrabul land.
Okay, thanks. Mr Phillips, you're able to respond to that, please?
Through the chair, we have approached the Power Corps. It's not an issue for them.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Edwards, please.
slither of land seemed to cause a lot of confusion for a small piece of land. I had a similar question, actually. It's a little bit different, though. So I was trying to understand the difference between, like, obviously council owns nature strips, right? That's a slither of land in front of a property and people have access by building across those. What's the difference between this slither of land and what would be normally considered a nature strip?
Mr Phillips?
So through the chair, this is a titled piece of land. So it's part of a title, so it could be separately disposed of, whereas a road reserve is vested into council. It's not a titled piece of land.
Okay. We have a... Yes, Councillor Ward, another question?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I note that the two adjoining properties, and I'm terrible with my north, south, east and west, but as you look down at the photo provided, Rob, the two adjoining properties are residential in what is largely an industrial area. The reduction of the car parks will offer obviously quite a bit of car parking across the road. Can we do anything to protect the best interests of those residential properties to ensure that we don't get commercial vehicles parking in front of those properties?
Mr Phillips, you're able to respond to that, please?
Through the chair, really the only way we can do that is through parking restriction times on the street. It's a publicly available area. Those two houses are located in an industrial zone and they've been there for a long period of time.
Thank you for that. Councillor, we have a mover. Councillor Dudzik has moved. Is there a second for that, please? Councillor Tatchell. Any opposition? I'll put that. All those in favour? It's carried. Thank you. Now we move on to 7.4, and I apologise to the people in the gallery who thought, why are you being called up and not the item? But anyway, we move forward. Thank you. We have speakers as Mr Ben King and Mr Tim McNamara. If you'd like to come up to the desk, please, and just give your presentation.
You good, Tim? Good evening, everyone. My name's Ben. I was born on the farm adjacent to where the property is that we are seeking our planning permit for to build our residence. And at 20 years ago, lived on the actual same property and have known the Muirs my entire life. And David asked us if we wanted to, or if we'd be interested in purchasing this land to build on so we could move back into the area with our young children. And so we did, because when he actually purchased the property, he purchased it from the Moorabool Council, and at the time it had a planning permit with it. Now, I understand that the planning criteria has changed since then because it's lapsed, but we purchased it, and on our rates notice it says residential lifestyle property. So we kind of were under the impression that we would be able to obtain another planning permit to build there in the future, and it looks like it might not happen. So we just sort of, it's only a small parcel in the middle of his property. It's never been farmed. It was previously the Corrobeat Primary School, and he had no use for it. So because it had a plantation on it at the time when we bought it. So he wasn't even farming it, and yeah, now basically it's just a little tiny wedge in the middle of his property, and it's got its own title. So we just, yeah, we're hoping that we could build there one day and move back and move the kids out of town and have the same sort of like upbringing that we had.
Okay, thank you. Any questions of
In a
Mr
nutshell.
King? Any questions of Mr King, councillors? Okay. Mr McNamara, do you wish to sort of...
Just further to what Ben was saying, I think there needs to be consideration given to the fact that the land as purchased by Mr Muir it came with the title, so he had no reason to think that when he sold the land to his friends, they wouldn't be able to build on there as well. And this is sort of where we're at now with this block of land that exists and the conditions that it exists because the council sold it to Mr Muir without making him consolidate his land and allowing him to have this piece of land that was still titled as its own. So we sort of wanted that to be considered in your decision. That, yeah.
Thank you, Mr McNamara. Any questions of Mr McNamara? Okay, thank you for your presentation, and council will now duly assess the application, so you can resume your seats. Thank you.
Cheers.
Councillor Tatchell.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I requested an alternate for this particular block. There was a couple of anomalies in the discussions, the briefings around this in terms of what may or may not be missing, and it appears that's covered the actual farm plan. So there was two options given to the applicant when they made the application, and from what I can see, the applicants filled out done both. So one was a very expensive one. So, Mr Mayor, I've got an alternate motion there that approves this. I won't go into a debate.
Is this the one that's been circulated? Is this the one that's been circulated, Councillor?
Yes, Mr Mayor.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So you wish to move the alternative?
Yeah, I'd like to move it, and then we'll see where it lands, and if we need to debate it, I'll debate it.
Okay. So Councillor Edwards? So Councillor Edwards second. Is there any opposition, councillors? I'll put that all those in favour. Carried, thank you. We're moving on to 7.5. We have a speaker, Mr Paul Austin. Oh, sorry. Yeah, certainly. Council attached, sorry, I should have, it's my mistake. Council attached will move an alternate recommendation which was issued by council for a dwelling. So Mr Phillish will now give you a copy of that with the conditions that they're for. So thank you. Moving on to 7.5, which relates to a request for variation of restricted covenant at 10 Parkside Drive, Hopeton Park. We have a speaker, Mr Paul Austin. Mr Austin, do you want to come up to the table, please, and give your presentation?
G'day everyone. Yeah, just here today to sort of voice my opinion. We bought a property in Hopeton Park around mid-August 2020. We're looking at purchasing our forever home there. We outgrew our first home in Werribee, and we have a large amount of collectible cars and recreational vehicles. We were looking at Hopeton Park as we knew others moving to the area. They had nice big blocks of lands with big sheds to accommodate storage of collectible cars, etc. We called up the local council and town planning as soon as we found a house we liked, and we're told then. Sorry. When we found a house we liked, and we told them we found a house that we liked and wanted to put in an offer on a property, but it didn't have a big enough shed to store all of our vehicles. We asked what we would need to do and what would be required. When told the process, we're told the process would be easy as everyone has big sheds in Hopeton Park. All we had to do was apply to council and change a restrictive covenant on the property. Like everyone else does, we won't have a problem. The council town planner Googled the property and looked at the neighbouring properties and said there will be no issue there. There are plenty of large sheds around us. As we have no idea about this sort of stuff, we appointed Michael Harone from Bacchus Marsh Design and Drafting Services to help us through the process. From day one, we feel like we were hard done by, as we were advised that we had to send out 120 plus letters to local properties around us, and some of these properties that were sent letters about our property have approved sheds by council like ours or larger. Mind you, a friend 2 streets away had to send out 12 letters. These 120 plus letters stated that we wanted to apply to change our restrictive covenant on our property. It had the shed size on the letter, 35 by 18 by 5.2. My friend 2 streets away, his letter said large outbuilding, no size. These letters alone cost us $1,860. So far to date, we have spent $4,850 to get us here. Obviously sending out 120 plus letters and putting the size of the shed on them, we were bound to get an objection. There was one objection. They were not worried about the size of the shed, just the height and the purpose of the shed, what it was used for. Probably worried we were working out of it or something like that. This shed is for personal storage only. We have tried our best to keep the property clean and tidy. We want to get all of our vehicles under cover and out of sight, as we don't want the property looking like an eyesore or a wrecking yard. We don't want the place looking messy. We don't want vehicles lying around at the rear of the property, attracting snakes, etc. We don't want the yard looking messy with like shipping containers either. We just really want to keep everything nice and neat in one area. We've driven around the estate. There's 20 plus properties with massive sheds bigger than what we require. So yeah, all we want to do is get a shed to keep the place looking nice and tidy.
Thank you, Mr Austin. Any questions of Mr Austin? Councillor Tatchell and then Councillor Manari, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. Why do you need the 5 metres?
I've got a motorhome, a bus, so we need the height to get that in there. So it is a bit of an eyesore, but just sit outside and...
That's a big motorhome at 5 metres, you wouldn't get under the power.
It's a bus, a proper bus.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're only allowed 4.3.
You're allowed 4.3?
Their stock rate's 4.6, so you've got a pretty big motorhome.
Oh, yeah, well, no, we want to get the bus in there and maybe a little bit of a mezzanine storage, so...
So how many vehicles are you going to put in there?
I've got 13 cars, 2 boats, trailers, the motorhome, motorbikes. So it's just for storage. It's just to keep everything dry and out of sight, really.
Yeah, fair enough.
So,
Thank you.
Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Manari, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Austin, are you able to access the back of your property on the side of your house?
there's a court there, but there's no gate or anything. It's not accessible, no.
It's not accessible, so you can't get the bus down past the house?
Oh, yeah. Down past my house I can. I thought you were talking about at the rear of the property. There's a court at the rear of the property.
And were you planning to access at the rear of the property as well?
No, just outside, down our side.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions of Mr Austin, councillors? Okay. Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Mr Austin, for your presentation. If you could just please resume your seat, and council will now deliberate on this matter. So, Councillor Tatchell, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, we've obviously had a lot of issues up at Hopeton Park with a lot of these sheds where we've made exceptions, and it's created some problems. And whilst I'm not a fan of these 173 covenants, I think they cause more trouble than what they're worth. My concern is that at what point in Hopeton Park, if we continue to push this covenant in terms of shedding, and I know we've had exceptions and they've been allowed through, at what point is it going to become inconsistent? And at what point should we be looking at Hopeton Park in general and seeing if the covenant's relevant today in terms of our development as we go forward?
Thank you, Councillor Tatchell. Mr Phillish and Mr Bazudin, are you able to respond to that, please? Sorry, just before
Through
you
the
do,
chair,
would it be fair
I'm-
to say that this covenant, there may be multiple covenants across that whole site?
Through the chair, I can explain that. So Hopeton Park, as the subdivision progressed, there was probably, I believe there's about 5 different covenants. So it depends on what stage you were in as to how many properties are beneficiaries to it. So that might answer the reason before where the gentleman advised that he had to advertise to a series of people and somebody else might not have had to advertise to that. So it depends on, the covenant is very clear on who is burdened by it and who the beneficiaries are. We have to advertise to the beneficiaries.
So would it be fair to say that, as Mr Austin was saying, in the area there were still large sheds, they could be lots on another covenant completely different from this one, possibly?
Through the chair, yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Ward, please?
Yeah, just for clarity, Rob, can you just, I suppose, further to Tom's question, the covenants, are there covenants in Hopeton Park that do allow sheds more than 13 metres long, 7 metres wide and 4 metres tall?
Through the chair, this covenant actually allows for a shed for 20 metres by... It's different to some of the others. A lot of them do have 13 by 7. I have to read exactly, but it is 20 metres by... I'm not sure if it's 9. By... Sorry, I'll take that back. I'm mixing it up
page
with
59.
Another application.
Page 59 clearly says 13 metres, 7 metres by 4.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Councillor Wood?
So, my apologies. Yes, there are.
Yep.
Because that's why I've got confused. I'm
that's
dealing with another one which I think
Yep.
has 20 metres by something. Yep.
Okay. Do you have a supplementary question, or Councillor Ward?
No, thank you.
Councillor Tatchell, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, on the basis these covenants generally have no recourse, so like if it's rejected, but the fact that it's under a covenant, it's unlikely that it'd be successful anywhere in terms of VCAT or other items. But my concern is that any shed that needs a mezzanine needs to be above 4 metres, and that's just a reality and the differential between a shed that's 4 metres and 4.8 is probably marginal at best, and certainly wouldn't be noticeable over 5,000 square metres of land. And you'd basically have to go with a tape measure to measure it, and that's why I question whether the covenant needs to change to at least make it practicable for people that want to build a shed for a mezzanine floor, because they're basically restricted every time based on this 4 metre ruling, and that's where I say it may be outdated because the measurements of today and the vehicles today are completely different. So that's my concern, Mr Mayor. There's no recourse to this if it fails.
Thank you. I guess council doesn't create these covenants. They're created by the developers of the subdivision. So, and one of the mechanisms to try and remove them is by a planning permit through council or go to the Supreme Court. That's another option, which I'm not suggesting anyone goes there, but I'm just saying that's a means. So we have to sort of follow the process. I guess that's what's happening here at the moment. And because of the different developments, as Mr Phillips said, that occurred over the Hopeton Park area, there's a variation in covenants. They're not all uniform, and I take your point. Some of them, as I said, they don't even come into being as even part of a planning permit process. That which the developer does when they sell the lots. So that's how they evolve, and but they're long gone, and we're now dealing with it. So, but having said that, councillors, I need Councillor Ward, please.
I have another question for Rob or Henry, if I may. The covenant explicitly says no such outbuilding shall be of a size greater than, and I've gone through that. Any outbuildings on a lot other than towards the rear lot, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't say anything that we're restricted to one shed. Is that correct? Am I reading this right? That you actually can have 2 sheds?
Through the chair, that is correct.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Any further questions? Councillor Edwards, please.
Yeah, I just have 2, and the first one is if there wasn't a single objection, and noting officer's recommendation has to be what it is because the objection, would council have approved it? So on its own merit?
So through the chair,
Village.
we didn't actually go through that process because we had an objection, and under this particular provision, if there's an objection, it's deemed as detriment.
Okay, second question.
And my second question was, does council have the ability, because this is, over the years we've had different varying views, whether council can vary a covenant or not. So does council have the ability to vary the covenant?
So through the chair, it's the process we're going through at the moment. In this case, the way this was registered, if there's an objection, we can't.
Does that answer your question, councillor?
Sort of. It's sort of saying we can, but we can't.
Sorry, through the chair, can I make it clear, is through the process, we have to go through a process. So the only way to vary a covenant is through a planning permit process. That's what I meant by that. Then, depending on the provision, this particular provision, if there's an objection, we don't have the ability to. There are, as the Mayor has indicated, there are other ways of doing it, which is Supreme Court, or potentially a planning scheme amendment could also remove a covenant.
Councillor Tatchell, you have a question, please?
Sorry, Mr Mayor, I don't want to labour on it either, but on the basis that we are going through a process for a planning scheme amendment, my question would be that if this was rejected tonight, does that create a problem for the applicant once the planning scheme amendment has gone through to resubmit on the basis that there may be a change? Because the problem here is that there's two questions in this. One is, how far away does the objector live, or is it just an objection based on the covenant, or on the basis that we're going to change it anyway? Would this be a matter where it would be better to advise the applicant to defer it indefinitely until that comes up, or, because if they put it through and it fails, does that preclude them from ever doing it again?
Mr Phillips or Mr Bazudin, how do you able to respond to that?
So through the Chair, we don't have an amendment at the moment.
No.
I was just suggesting that that is a process that could be undertaken, but there is no planning scheme amendment
I think
proposed.
what Councillor Thatcher was asking is, if this were rejected now and an amendment came into the future, would it prejudice them? That's what I think was suggesting. No. Okay. Right. Okay.
And how far away is the objector live from this?
I don't know. Is anyone able to respond? The objector, how far away from the property? Well, obviously they're a beneficiary.
No, I can't answer that question off the top. They're a beneficiary, so that we can... Sorry.
Mr Lovell, please.
Okay, there you go. 2 properties to the north.
Okay, thank you. Councillors, any further questions, or there's a recommendation there? I think, so I'm in your hands.
I'll move we defer the item, Mr Mayor.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Ward? I'll put that. All those in favour? It'll be deferred. Thank you. For further advice?
Yes, thanks, Mr.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you for that, councillors. To the applicants, Mr Austin, basically council has deferred this matter, hasn't made a decision, so it's been deferred for the moment, just to sort of perhaps reassess. So that's where it's at the moment, just so you're aware of what we've done. The next item of business is item 8, update on VCAT decisions. Are there any, Mr Sidenhouse?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We've just got an update on 2 VCAT decisions and mediated outcomes. I'll hand over to Mr Phillips.
Through the Chair, thank you. Just an update on the Mattingly Brown Coal amendment to the hours to the gate and the opening. As you'd be aware, that there was some VCAT matters in relation to that where we were all working towards a consent order. There were some issues raised by the member in relation to the extent of that consent order and whether it exceeded what was first applied for. So essentially what's happened is that the member has given council and the applicants 2 options. One is we go to a legal member and we go and get some definition, or we take it back where it goes back to council and an application, an amended application is put forward which clarifies those matters. And that's the decision that was made. So we're just in the process at the moment of considering the extent of notification that might need and actually defining the changes to it. So it's just a bit of an update. It will come back to council. We'll determine what the application is for. We'll go through the process of notification, and when it's ready, it'll come back to council for determination.
Okay, thank you. Second update?
The other matter is in relation to the Hanson Quarry in Comida. You're aware that this is the one that we had a VCAT case that went for consent. We were with the objectors, the applicants and ourselves. We all sat down and basically got to the point of a consent order, but there was an issue that Melbourne Water hadn't received the information that they required to make their assessment. So the matter was put on hold until that was looked at. That's finally been resolved, and the consent order was signed off as of yesterday. So that's a good outcome. We've got it's sorted now. Yep.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for that update, and obviously a positive contribution by officers in delivering that outcome, which is very good. No other updates. Any other business, councillors? Oh, Councillor Tatchell, please.
Just a question, Mr Mayor. Sorry, excuse me. I noted in that final report on that last item that it talked about the wall height of the shed, and I noted in the covenant that 4 metres is the limit in terms of the height of the wall. Is there a restriction on the height of the ridge?
Mr Phillish?
No, through the chair, that's not. It refers to the length, the width, and the height at the eave.
Okay.
I have a supplementary to that, if I may, Mr.
Certainly.
So on that basis, if the wall height was at 4 metres and the angle was changed at the ridge to give the extra height for a mezzanine, you could probably achieve the same thing without breaching the covenant.
Well, that may be the case. I think we sort of we've sort of deferred the matter. We don't want to sort of revisit it just at the moment. I think they're valid points you make. I think they're valid points, but we certainly I don't think we'll hammer it out here tonight. Put it that way.
Yeah, well, just looking for an angle, Mr. Mayor. Just looking for an angle.
Thank you, councillor. Are there any other? Yes, Councillor Ward, please.
I just want to commend the planning department on the Hanson Quarries outcome. Hanson Quarries are one of the larger employers in our municipality, and certainly in Bacchus Marsh. So that's a great outcome. That consent order's been signed. Well done.
Okay. Well done. Any other business councillors, officers? Okay. Thank you very much for your attendance here tonight. Thank you for all the presenters. Thank you, the officers, for your reports. Thank you, councillors, for your deliberation. The next meeting is the 17th of August, and so at this juncture I'll close the meeting. Thank you all very much. Thank